Hello and welcome to my channel. If you've been here before, welcome back. My name is Alfonso Peluso and I'm an associate teaching professor in the College of Architecture at IIT, the home of the legendary Mies van der Rohe, and I'm adjunct faculty at Columbia College in the Interior Architecture program. Shout out to all my students. I hope you're having a great day. Today, we're going to look at a super important topic in regards to rendering. That is glass. Glass is the most important material in architectural rendering, so it's definitely deserves its own video. All right, what are we looking at here? So what we're looking at here is a rendering, and if I turn off this layer reflection, this is what the rendering looked like when it came out of the rendering software, which I like because it has some transparency and you can see what's happening inside the building. And that makes a really nice pairing with a reflection layer, which I can turn on here. And I have this reflection layer and I can reduce the opacity or increase the opacity depending on the effect that I'm going for. And all this is made possible by this magical glass material ID map, which gives me a color for all my glass, and I can easily select that in Photoshop. Before we jump into the tutorial, if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? Search me up on YouTube at my first name Alfonso and my last name Peluso. If you are a designer, there is something here for you. For all my interior architects, my interior architecture students, my architecture students, there is something definitely here for you. So click on the subscribe button, click on the bell to receive all the notifications. Don't miss out on anything. Help me get to 14,000 subscribers. That would be a great milestone. I'm looking forward to that. Help me get there. Also, connect with me on Instagram at my first name Alfonso underscore my last name Peluso. See what I'm up to. See what AI images I'm creating. See what my students are making. Connect with me, and I'd love to hear from you. All right, let's jump into this tutorial. So, whatever rendering software you're using, there is definitely a glass material that you'll need to apply. I like to approach this in two ways. One, where the glass is made in Photoshop, like I demonstrated earlier, and another where the glass is made in the rendering software because let's face it, if we're making an animation, we won't have Photoshop to make our glass for us. So I want to look at those two ways. All right, we're going to start with the Photoshop way. So whatever rendering software you're using, what you want to be able to figure out is how to make a material ID map. You want to make a material ID map, which was what gave us this image right here. Okay, so let's walk through this in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my rendering. Okay, so here is our rendering. And in Photoshop, I'm going to unlock my background layer and I'm going to name this. I'm going to call this rendering. And then I'm going to open up my material ID, which is this image. And I'm going to Control A to select all, Control C, and then Shift Control V to paste in place. And I'm going to name this Glass Material ID. And I'm going to get a selection of just my glass. And the way I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go to Main Menu, Select, Color Range, and I'm going to click on the glass. Notice my fuzziness is set to 0. And I'll click OK. And now I have a selection of the glass. And I'm going to go ahead and save that selection. So I'm going to go to Main Menu, Select, Save Selection, and I'm going to call this glass. All right, so now I have my glass selection. So I'm going to go ahead and deselect. I'm going to use Control D to deselect. And I'm going to open up my reflection map. So I want to talk a little bit about this reflection map. So what this is I've actually used my rendering software to make a camera looking the opposite direction of the rendering camera. So looking behind the camera. So if you're standing looking at a building, that building is reflecting what's behind you. So I made a rendering of what's behind me. This is one way to do it. Another way is just to grab images maybe from Google or a specific website, but I like this idea of making a camera of what's behind me because that's the true reflections. So you have to have something in your model. In this case, it was sky and trees. So I'm going to take this, Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and then I'm going to paste that in, Shift Control V. And I'm going to name that reflection. And I'm going to place it under my glass material ID. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer mask to the reflection. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go back to my selection that I saved. So I'm going to go to Select, Load Selection, and I'm going to choose the glass. And I'm going to turn off the glass matte ID layer. And on this reflection layer, I have a selection. And if I use the Quick Mask tool, it will apply a mask to that layer. So that's my reflection layer. And I can go ahead and I can reduce the opacity on this. I can move that reflection layer up. I can scale it. So I'm going to go ahead and disable the layer mask while I'm doing this. So I can move it up. I can scale it. I'm going to scale it to be a little bit larger. So I can use Control T and I can scale that up a bit. So I like this method because I have a lot of control over everything. Okay, we'll leave it there. And I'll bring that layer mask. Let's see if I have to reapply it or, yeah, I'm going to have to reapply it. So I'm going to delete the layer mask, get my selection. This is why it's a good idea to save it. So we saved our selection. And we're going to go ahead and apply the layer mask. And then we can reduce the opacity, which we already have previously done that. I'll give it a little more transparency. So lots of control over the glass. You can do things like make gradient layers. If I wanted some gradient color on the building, I could go ahead and do that. I could make a new layer. So Shift Control N makes a new layer. I'll call this glass gradient. I can set up some gradient colors. So I'm going to do like a purple. And I have a yellow here. I'm going to keep that yellow. And I'm going to use my gradient tool. And it's important that I'm under basics and I'm just foreground the background. And I'm going to go ahead and do a little gradient there. So that's a smart gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click and rasterize this layer. And I'm going to right click on the layer mask and delete the layer mask. So it's just a gradient. I'm going to put that below my reflection. And I'm going to move it over a little bit because I want the purple to be on the building. Okay, so we can go to select, load selection, load our glass, and we can apply that layer mask. And we can reduce the opacity. So now I have a little color variation in the glass, which is kind of nice. So you can do a lot with this. So I really like this workflow of being able to adjust the glass in Photoshop. All right, the second way we have to look at glass is in our rendering software. What if we're making an animation? We like to have our reflections on our glass in the rendering software. So let's go over, in this case, I'm working in Lumion. And I'm going to go ahead and look at the glass material. Okay, so under materials in any rendering software, you're going to have a glass option or glass options. So in Lumion, there's a lot of glass options that you can choose from. I'm going to go ahead and look at the mirror glass. I kind of like this mirror glass. And I'm going to apply one of these. They're all a little bit different. They have little bit different settings in them. Okay. So you see with this mirror 006, I'm getting some reflections, but not as nice as what I was getting in Photoshop. So I'm going to want to tweak this. So I'm going to go to settings. And what I'm going to do is I want to see some transparency to this glass. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce the metalness. So now, depending on what glass you choose, this might be opacity, transparency, or in this case, metalness. Okay, so we're looking at reducing the metalness to start to see inside the building, getting something similar to what we had in Photoshop. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the glass reflection texture that we worked with in Photoshop. I'm going to add that directly in my rendering software. In this case, it's going to be my texture map or a diffuse map or a color map, depending what software you're in. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to bring my reflection map in. And then you see that being applied. I'm going to increase the scale of it. Okay, getting it somewhere around what we had in Photoshop. I can adjust the placement of it. So here's my Y in this case, my Z. I want to move it so that there's trees on that balcony like we had in Photoshop. So that's one way to do it. So the glass is too opaque. I want to start to see inside the building like we saw in Photoshop. So we're going to adjust some parameters. So with this particular glass I picked, it's really a combination of the amount of texture we're seeing, the texture amount. So as I reduce this, it's displaying that texture. But you're seeing when I reduce the texture, it's still very opaque. And in this case, the metalness setting was affecting the opaqueness of it. So it's a mixture of the texture setting and the metalness. All right, let's look at another glass. So we're going to go back to materials, and under glass, we're going to look at an architectural glass and see what kind of settings we have with those. So I'm going to go ahead and there's so many to choose from, and I just invite you to experiment with as many of these as possible. I'm just going to pick the first one we have here, and now we have a transparency slider. And we have some other ones we didn't have before, like frostiness and rain streaks. So let's go ahead and apply our texture. And let's increase that texture amount so we're seeing that. And then we have to adjust the map scale. This has a relief, so this one is just coming with a normal map, so it's going to have some bump to it. You can leave that or take it out depending on what you're looking for. And then we have the transparency, so we can have no transparency or a lot of transparency. This one has double-sided, and it's just making that glass double-sided. What do you like different? It's just between 0 and 1. There's some distortion. There's a roughness, which is how smooth or rough you want it. There's a frostiness. So just some different settings with these glass materials. And it's just really, remember, it's adding a diffuse map or a color map or a texture map, depending on your software, what that's being called. Finding a way to adjust the reflectivity and the transparency or opacity. And once you get those dialed in, you're good to go. All right. That is all I wanted to cover. Glass. So important in your renderings. I hope you found this helpful and I hope you'll make use of it. If you liked the video, please tell me why in the comments. Also, give me a like. My head's going to pop up in the upper left. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and click on it. I'm going to put some videos for you in the upper right and the lower right. All right. Enjoy your day, and I will see you on the next one.